The call came in at 2:17 a.m. A single-family residence, 1423 Willow Creek Lane, reporting smoke. Captain David McMillan, a man whose 40-odd years had seen more than their fair share of burning buildings, rolled out of his bunk with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it thousands of times. The station was a blur of motion, the familiar clang of gear, the shouts of, "Let's go," and the roar of the engine coming to life. This was the rhythm of their lives, a sudden jolt into adrenaline-fueled purpose. Willow Creek Lane was a quiet, tree-lined street in an older part of the city, known for its well-maintained bungalows and generational residents. As Engine 12 rounded the corner, the smoke was visible, a lazy gray plume rising from the back of a modest two-story house. No flames visible from the front, which was a good sign. Maybe a kitchen fire, contained. "All right boys, let's keep it tight," Mac called over the radio, his voice calm, authoritative. "Johnson, get that primary line ready. Miller, ventilation. Thompson, you're with me for entry." They pulled up, the engine's air brakes hissing. The homeowner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, stood on her lawn, wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering more from shock than cold. "My kitchen," she choked out, pointing a trembling finger. I left the stove on." Mac nodded, a brief, reassuring glance. "We'll take care of it, ma'am." The front door was unlocked. Smoke, thick and acrid, immediately billowed out, stinging their eyes even through their masks. The heat was manageable, indicating the fire hadn't spread far. Their thermal imagers cut through the haze, painting the interior in shades of orange and yellow, showing the heat signature concentrated in the kitchen at the rear of the house. "All right, Thompson, let's make entry." "Stay low, stay safe," Mac ordered. They moved in, low to the ground, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The living room was untouched, furniture shrouded in a ghostly layer of smoke. As they approached the kitchen, the heat intensified. The fire was confined to the stove and the cabinets above it, a greasy, stubborn blaze fueled by cooking oil. Johnson and Miller were already there, dousing the flames with practiced precision. The hiss of water on burning grease filled the air, followed by the acrid smell of burnt food and melted plastic. Within minutes, the main fire was out. The immediate danger was over. Now came the overhaul. The tedious, critical work of ensuring the fire was completely extinguished, checking for hidden embers, ventilating the smoke, and salvaging what they could. This was often where the real creepiness set in, not during the chaotic rush of the blaze, but in the quiet aftermath, when the adrenaline faded, and the true extent of the damage and sometimes something else became apparent. "All right, Thompson, let's check the rest of the first floor. Look for extension, any hot spots." "I'll take Sector A, you take Sector B," Mac instructed, pointing towards the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Thompson, a younger firefighter with 5 years on the job, nodded. "Copy that, Cap." Mac moved systematically, methodically checking walls, ceilings, and floors with his gloved hands, feeling for residual heat. The house was settling, the sounds of creaking wood and dripping water filling the silence. The air was still thick with smoke, but it was dissipating, revealing the mundane details of a life interrupted. Family photos on a mantelpiece, a half-read book on a coffee table, a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator. He entered what appeared to be a small study. A desk, a bookshelf, a comfortable armchair. Everything was coated in a fine layer of soot, but otherwise unharmed. He ran his hand along the wall, checking for heat. Nothing. Then he felt it. A distinct, localized cold. Not a draft from an open window, but a pocket of frigid air, as if someone had opened a freezer door right in front of him. It was jarring, unnatural in the still warm, smoke-filled room. He pulled his hand back, a shiver running down his spine despite the heavy gear. He shone his flashlight on the spot. It was just a section of the wall, painted a faded yellow. Nothing remarkable. He reached out again cautiously. The cold was still there, a perfect circle about the size of a dinner plate. He pressed his gloved palm against it, and the cold seeped through, an icy prickle against his skin. "Thompson, you finding anything?" Mac called out, his voice a little louder than intended. "Just smoke damage in the hallway, Cap. No extension." Thompson's voice echoed back, sounding distant. Mac tried to rationalize it. An old house, maybe a poorly insulated section of the wall, a draft from somewhere he couldn't see. But the cold was too specific, too intense, and completely isolated. It felt wrong. He moved on, continuing his sweep, but the cold spot lingered in his mind. He found no other anomalies on the first floor. The kitchen was being ventilated, the air slowly clearing. "All right, let's get upstairs," Mac announced, heading for the staircase. "Thompson, you take the front bedrooms. Miller, check the back." Johnson, start getting the salvage covers down here. Upstairs the air was clearer, less smoke. The bedrooms were untouched by fire, only a light film of soot on everything. Mac entered the master bedroom, his flashlight beam sweeping across a neatly made bed, a dresser, a nightstand with a half-empty glass of water. He began his methodical check, tapping walls, feeling for heat. He reached the far wall, near a window overlooking the backyard. And there it was again. The cold. Even more pronounced than downstairs. It wasn't a spot this time, it was a larger area encompassing the entire section of the wall around the window. The air in this corner of the room was noticeably colder, the hair on his arms prickling. He pulled off his glove, pressing his bare hand against the wall. The chill was immediate, bone deep. It felt like touching a block of ice. He looked out the window. Nothing but Mrs. Henderson's quiet backyard, dark and still. He heard Miller's voice from the next room. Cap, I think I found a small hot spot in the closet in the kids' room. Nothing major. Copy that, Miller. Keep an eye on it, Mac replied, his voice strained. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. This wasn't normal. He'd been in hundreds of houses, old and new, and he'd never encountered anything like this. He stepped back from the cold wall, his eyes scanning the room. Everything was ordinary. Too ordinary. He felt a sudden, intense feeling of being watched, a pressure on the back of his neck. He spun around, flashlight beam darting, but saw nothing. The feeling persisted, a prickling sensation that made him want to get out of the room, out of the house. He heard a faint sound then, a soft, almost imperceptible thump from the other side of the cold wall. It sounded like something very light falling, like a photo frame. But there was no frame on the wall. He checked the floor but saw nothing. Miller, you still in there? Mac called out, his voice tight. Yeah, Cap, just finishing up, Miller replied. Mac hesitated. Should he call it in? Report a cold spot and an unexplained thump? They'd think he was losing it. Firefighters were practical men. They dealt with tangible threats: fire, smoke, collapsing structures. Not this. He finished his sweep of the bedroom, avoiding the cold wall, and moved to the next. The rest of the upstairs was clear. No more cold spots. Just the lingering smell of smoke and the mundane quiet of a house recently touched by disaster. As they began to pack up their gear, Mrs. Henderson was allowed back inside, escorted by Johnson. She walked slowly, her eyes wide, taking in the damage. When she reached the master bedroom, she stopped dead, her gaze fixed on the cold section of the wall. Oh, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's still here. Mac's head snapped up. What's still here, Mrs. Henderson? She turned to him, her eyes clouded with a distant sadness. The cold. It's always been cold there. Ever since my husband passed away in that spot. She pointed to the very section of the wall Mac had felt the intense chill. He was sitting in his favorite armchair, right there, reading. Just went quietly. A chill, far colder than any localized cold spot, ran through Mac. He remembered the faint thump, like a book or a frame falling. The armchair was gone, moved out for the fire. But the presence, the cold, it remained. He loved that spot, Mrs. Henderson continued, a faint, wistful smile on her lips. Said it was the quietest place in the house. Sometimes late at night I'd hear him sigh or turn a page even after he was gone. I just thought it was the house settling. Or maybe I was just missing him too much. Mac looked at the wall, then at Mrs. Henderson. He didn't know what to say. He was a man of logic, of science, of tangible threats. But he had felt that cold. He had heard that thump. And now Mrs. Henderson's words gave it a context that defied all logic. They finished the overhaul, packed their gear, and left Mrs. Henderson with her neighbors. As Engine 12 pulled away from Willow Creek Lane, the streetlights casting long shadows, Mac glanced back at the house. The smoke had mostly cleared, but in his mind he could still see the faint, icy aura around that upstairs window. Back at the station, the usual post-call debrief was subdued. No one mentioned anything out of the ordinary. But as Mac sat at his desk, filling out the incident report, he felt a lingering chill in his hands. He looked at Thompson, who was quietly cleaning his helmet. Thompson met his gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Confusion? Unease? Mac knew then that he wasn't alone in what he'd experienced. They were firefighters. They faced death and destruction every day. But sometimes, in the quiet aftermath, in the places where life had abruptly ceased, something lingered. Something cold, something unseen, a whisper from the edge of understanding. And no amount of water or thermal imaging could ever truly extinguish that. The cold spot in Sector C wasn't just a cold spot. It was a lingering echo, a silent witness to a life that had ended, and a chilling reminder that some presences, even after the flames are gone, never truly leave. They continued their search, the incident unsettling Dave. He kept glancing over his shoulder, convinced he was being watched. The vastness of the mill, the way the sound distorted and echoed, made it easy to feel disoriented, to imagine things. But this felt different. As they moved into an adjacent section, a storage area filled with old water-damaged crates, the air grew noticeably colder. A distinct chill, cutting through the heat of the fire, enveloped them. It was localized, a pocket of frigid air in the midst of the inferno. "You feel that, Cap?" Dave asked, his breath misting slightly inside his mask. Jensen felt it. A cold spot. Not uncommon in old, drafty buildings, but this was too intense, too isolated. It felt like walking into a refrigerated room. He swept his light across the crates, looking for a source, a broken window, anything. Nothing. Then, from the darkness beyond their flashlight beams, they heard it. A whisper. Clearer than anything before. It was a woman's voice, faint and mournful, speaking a name. "Thomas?" Jensen froze. He looked at Dave. Dave's eyes were wide, staring into the darkness. He had heard it too. "Who's Thomas?" Dave whispered, his voice barely audible. Jensen shook his head, his mind racing. This wasn't smoke inhalation. This wasn't the building settling. This was something else. Something they couldn't explain. He was a man of logic, of facts, of what he could see and touch. But the cold, the whisper, it defied explanation. They finished their search of the storage area quickly, the cold and the whisper pushing them forward. They found no victims, no hidden fires. The main blaze was being brought under control by Chen and her team. As they regrouped, the fire was mostly contained, leaving behind a smoldering, waterlogged shell. The air was still thick with smoke, but the oppressive heat had lessened. The sounds of the fire were replaced by the hiss of cooling metal and the drip of water. Back at the station, the debrief was short. The fire was out. No casualties. Another job done. But the usual post-fire camaraderie was subdued. Dave was quiet, his eyes distant. Jensen found himself staring at the wall, the whisper of Thomas still echoing in his mind. Later that week, Jensen found himself doing some research. The old textile mill, he discovered, had a grim history. Decades ago, in the early 1900s, there had been a devastating fire. Many workers were trapped inside. One of the victims was a young woman named Sarah, who had died trying to save her younger brother, Thomas, who was also working in the mill. Neither of their bodies were ever recovered, lost in the inferno and the subsequent collapse. Jensen closed the history book, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Sarah. Thomas. The whisper. The cough. The groan. The cold spot. It all clicked into place, a chilling, undeniable pattern. He looked at Dave, who was polishing the engine. Dave looked up, met his gaze, and then looked away quickly. Jensen knew Dave had been doing his own research. They never spoke about it directly. Firefighters rarely did. But a subtle shift occurred in the station. A new quietness settled over them when they responded to calls at old, abandoned buildings. They moved with a different kind of caution, a subtle reverence for the unseen. Jensen, the man of logic, now carried a new understanding. He still believed in science, in the tangible. But he also understood that some places, especially those touched by tragedy and intense human emotion, held on to something. An echo. A memory. A lingering presence that defied explanation. The old mill, now a desolate, burned-out husk, stood as a silent testament. The fire had consumed the building, but it had not consumed the echoes within. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled through the broken windows of the abandoned structure on River Road, some whispered that you could still hear the faint clanking of looms, the distant cough, and a mournful voice calling out a name, forever trapped in the echoes of the old mill. And the firefighters who had been there, who had felt the cold and heard the whisper, carried those echoes with them, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between the living and what remained. The dispatch crackled through the station speakers at 2348. Engine 7, Ladder 4, Brush Truck 2. Structure fire. Abandoned textile mill. 870 River Road. Reports of heavy smoke visible from a distance. Captain Mark Jensen, a man of quiet competence and 25 years on the job, nodded slowly. An abandoned mill. Those were always tricky. Vast, decaying structures, full of hidden hazards and often, a history of their own. His crew, a seasoned group including veteran Lieutenant Sarah Chen and younger firefighters like Dave Riley, moved with practiced efficiency. The clang of equipment, the low rumble of the engine, the familiar scent of diesel and turnout gear. This was the routine. As they approached River Road, the night sky was stained with an ominous orange glow, a testament to the fire's intensity. The old mill, a sprawling brick behemoth that had stood empty for decades, was a skeletal silhouette against the inferno. Flames licked at its broken windows, devouring the dry timber within, sending plumes of thick black smoke spiraling upwards. The sheer scale of it was daunting. "All right, listen up." Jensen's voice was calm over the radio, cutting through the roar of the blaze. "This place is a maze. We stick together. Chin, you're with me for interior attack. Riley, you're on ventilation with Miller. Watch your footing. This structure is unstable." They geared up, the heat already radiating from the massive building. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood dust and something else, a faint, metallic tang like old machinery. They forced entry through a rusted loading bay door, a blast of superheated air and smoke pushing them back. Inside, the mill was a cavernous, disorienting space. Smoke hung heavy, obscuring vision, turning their powerful flashlights into weak beams struggling against the gloom. The floor was uneven, littered with debris, broken glass, rusted metal, collapsed sections of ceiling. The roar of the fire was amplified, echoing off the high brick walls, creating a disorienting cacophony. "Stay low," Jensen ordered, his voice muffled by his mask. "Watch for drop-offs." They moved methodically, sweeping their lights, checking for extension. The fire seemed to be concentrated in the far wing, where the old weaving machines used to be. The heat was immense, forcing them to push forward through a suffocating wall of warmth. As they advanced deeper, past skeletal remains of machinery, Dave Riley paused. He swore he heard something. A faint clank clank clank, rhythmic and mechanical, like an old loom in operation. It was subtle, almost imperceptible beneath the roar of the fire, but distinct enough to make him hesitate. "You hear that, Cap?" Dave asked, his voice tight. Jensen stopped, listening intently. "Hear what, Riley?" "Just the fire." "No, like machinery." "Clanking," Dave insisted, shining his light around. The space was empty, save for the burning debris. "It's the building settling, Dave. Or the fire playing tricks on your ears." "Focus," Jensen said, his tone flat. He'd heard stranger things in fires. The mind could conjure anything under stress and smoke. They pressed on. The clanking sound faded, replaced by the crackle and hiss of the fire. They reached the main seat of the blaze, a furious inferno consuming what looked like old wooden spools and fabric remnants. Chin expertly directed the hose line, a powerful stream of water cutting through the flames. While Chin worked the line, Jensen and Dave began their primary search, sweeping the perimeter of the room, checking for victims or hidden pockets of fire. The smoke was still thick, swirling around them like a living entity. Then Dave heard it again. Not the clanking this time, but a low, guttural cough. And then a faint, almost human groan. It seemed to come from directly behind a large, rusted boiler, half hidden by smoke. "Cap, I think I heard something," Dave yelled, his heart pounding. He moved towards the boiler, his flashlight beam piercing the smoke. Jensen was beside him in an instant. "What did you hear?" "A cough. And a groan." "Sounded like someone," Dave whispered, his voice laced with urgency. They swept their lights over the boiler, around it, underneath it. "Nothing. Just more debris, more smoke." "Nobody here, Dave." "It's just the fire, the sounds of the building," Jensen stated, his voice firm, though he felt a faint prickle on the back of his neck. The boiler was cold to the touch, not even radiating heat from the nearby fire. It was an anomaly in itself. Dave, however, was convinced. He kept shining his light, his eyes wide. "I swear, Cap, it was right here." They found her in the living room, pale and unresponsive. Sarah immediately began working on her, while Rob cleared the area, making space. As he moved a small side table, his eyes were drawn to the mantelpiece. The dolls. The same porcelain doll he had found in the toy chest, now sat prominently on the mantelpiece, its vivid blue eyes staring directly at the front door. And arranged around it, facing it, were several other dolls from the daughter's room. "She loved her dolls," the husband, Mr. Peterson, said, his voice trembling as he watched Sarah work on his wife. "Our daughter moved out years ago. But my wife, she kept the room exactly as it was. Said it made her feel close to her. She'd spend hours up there arranging them, talking to them sometimes." He paused, a strange, distant look in his eyes. Especially that one. The big porcelain one. She called it Eleanor. Rob felt a chill. Eleanor. The doll he had found cold, the one he had instinctively turned face down. It was now back, prominently displayed, watching. Sarah worked tirelessly, but it was no use. Mrs. Peterson was gone. The following week, another call to 17 Elmwood Drive. This time a welfare check. Mr. Peterson hadn't been seen in days. Rob and Chris were on the team. The house was quiet. Too quiet. They found Mr. Peterson in the master bedroom. He was in his bed, seemingly asleep. But he wasn't breathing. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause. Just gone. The house was empty now. Completely silent. Rob walked through the rooms, the air heavy with an absence that felt almost tangible. He reached the daughter's room. It was still a mess from the fire. But the dolls. They were all gone. Every single one. The shelves were bare. The toy chest empty. He went downstairs. The mantelpiece was empty too. No Eleanor. No other dolls. It was as if they had never been there. He asked the police officer on scene. Did anyone remove anything from the house? The officer shook his head. No, Captain. House was secured after the wife passed. No forced entry. Nothing reported missing. Rob walked back outside, the late afternoon sun casting long, unsettling shadows. He looked at the house, a perfectly ordinary suburban home, now a silent tomb. The fire had been small. The deaths seemingly natural. But the sequence of events, the dolls, their silent presence, their sudden disappearance. It left a cold, unsettling question mark in his mind. He never spoke about it. Not to Sarah, not to Chris, not to anyone. Firefighters saw enough trauma, enough inexplicable sadness. Adding something like this, something that defied logic and reason, was just another burden. But the image of those unblinking doll eyes, their silent judgment, their uncanny arrangement, and the chilling cold of Eleanor stayed with him. Sometimes, on quiet nights at the station, when the city slept and the only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator, Rob would find himself staring at an empty corner of the room. He'd feel a faint chill, a subtle shift in the air. And for a fleeting moment, he would swear he could feel the unblinking gaze of countless porcelain eyes, watching him from the shadows, their silence more disturbing than any scream. The house on Elmwood Drive was empty now, but the silence of the dolls, a silence that spoke volumes, continued to haunt those who had witnessed it. The call came in on a Tuesday late afternoon. Not a roaring inferno, not a multi-car pile-up. Just a single-alarm residential fire. 17 Elmwood Drive. Reports of smoke from the second floor. Captain Robert "Rob" Hayes, a man whose face carried the permanent fatigue of 2 decades on the job, felt a familiar weariness settle over him. These small ones were often the trickiest. Complacency could kill you faster than a backdraft. His crew, including the quiet, observant medic, Sarah, and the eager but still green rookie, Chris, moved with their usual practiced rhythm. The engine rolled out, siren cutting through the suburban calm. Elmwood Drive was a quiet street, lined with well-kept, older homes. The smoke was visible now, a thin gray wisp curling from an upstairs window. No flames. Good. They pulled up. An older couple stood on the lawn, their faces pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. Upstairs, the woman choked out, pointing. Our daughter's room. We think it was a lamp. Rob nodded, a quick, reassuring gesture. We'll take care of it. Entry was quick. The front door was unlocked. Smoke was heavier inside, clinging to the air, but the heat was low. Their thermal imagers confirmed the source. A small, smoldering fire in a bedroom on the second floor. All right, Sarah, Chris, with me. Primary search, second floor. Johnson, get a line on that fire. Miller, ventilation, Rob ordered, his voice calm, cutting through the rising tension. They ascended the stairs, moving slowly, methodically. The smoke was thicker upstairs, making breathing labored even with their masks. The air felt heavy, stagnant. They reached the landing. 2 doors. One slightly ajar, emitting a faint, acrid smell. This one, Sarah murmured, pointing. Rob pushed the door open further. The room was small, clearly a child's bedroom. The fire was contained to a corner, where a bedside lamp had apparently fallen and ignited a pile of clothes. The flames were small, mostly smoldering, but the smoke was dense, filling the small space. Johnson was already there, quickly dousing the embers with a precise stream of water. The hiss and steam filled the room. While Johnson finished, Rob began the overhaul. He swept his flashlight beam across the room. A child's room. Pastel walls. A small bed. A dresser. And dolls. So many dolls. They lined the shelves, sat on the bed, even spilled from a toy chest in the corner. Porcelain dolls, rag dolls, plastic dolls. Their unblinking eyes seemed to follow his movements in the shifting smoke. As he checked the walls and ceiling for extension, feeling for heat, he noticed something. The dolls. Many of them were facing the corner where the fire had been. Not just a few, but almost all of them. Their fixed gazes were directed at the charred spot, a silent, unblinking audience. It was a minor detail easily dismissed. A child playing, arranging them. But something about it felt off. Unsettling. He moved to the toy chest, pushing aside some stuffed animals to check for any hidden embers. His hand brushed against something hard, cold, and smooth. He pulled it out. It was a doll. A large, old-fashioned porcelain doll, dressed in a faded lace dress. Its eyes, large and glassy, were a startlingly vivid blue. Its face was unblemished even though it had been in the smoke-filled room. It was remarkably cold to the touch, even through his glove. "Anything, Cap?" Chris asked, his voice muffled. "Just a lot of smoke damage." "No extension," Rob replied, his voice flat. He placed the doll back in the chest, face down. He didn't know why. It just felt like the right thing to do. They finished the overhaul. The fire was out. The room was a mess of soot and water, but the structural integrity was fine. The family, a quiet, reserved couple, thanked them profusely. Back at the station, the incident report was routine. Small fire, quickly contained. No injuries. But Rob couldn't shake the image of those dolls. Their silent, unblinking stares. And the coldness of that porcelain doll. The next day the call came in again. 17 Elmwood Drive. This time it was a medical emergency. The elderly woman, Mrs. Peterson, had collapsed. Heart attack. Rob and Sarah responded.